Congo stat 1. Good sniff, MiG-21. Kill.
Hello there, it's Prickly Hedgehog here. Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again. Today we're going to talk about the full fidelity modules and things that perhaps I should consider before buying my first full fidelity module, and also a little bit about the hardware and other bits and pieces that I need before I delve into this. So this is going to be a kind of an overview of DCS World in that respect, so stand by here. Now this was born over the last few weeks, and on my YouTube channel this idea for this particular video spawned out of this. On my YouTube channel and other forums, I've kind of noticed questions from various people who are new to the franchise and asking how to tackle DCS World, what purchases they should make to get into the game, and specifically with regards to the modules, the difference between the full fidelity modules and those that are not, and also the hardware that they may need. And one of the problems, of course, is that it's not easy to provide a straightforward answer to these kinds of questions, in part because it's the nature of this particular franchise, and that is, it's a sim. And because it's a sim, you're going to need to calculate how much you want to invest in the franchise in terms of the following things, and there are two that I've kind of narrowed down. One is time, and the other is money. Now, if you have neither, or are limited in your ability to invest either commodities into the game, you're probably going to need to evaluate your commitment to this franchise before embarking on any purchases. Now, I say this seriously, and I'm not trying to pan the game in any way. It's a great game. It's fun to get into. There's a lot of reward in here. But it's like most of the other sims, or similar sim modules, or franchises at least, in the game, in the gaming world, excuse me. Sims are a little bit different from a lot of other games. They are just that little bit more complex. So let's start with time, and I'm going to use an example that I had in my own life when I was doing a lot of sim racing. And sim racing, of course, is very similar to this genre because you need time in sim racing to learn the tracks. You had to have time to practice getting the best out of the car. You needed to learn how to set up the car. You needed to either do that or borrow setups from others and then tweak them to suit your particular racing style and the vehicle handling characteristics and how you responded to those things. And then once you've kind of got up to a race pace, where you were fast enough around the track to actually compete, well, that all went out the window because then you had to learn racecraft, and that is racing with 25 other people on the track. Human opponents who do wildly random things, usually crashing and causing major crashes in the first lap, far too aggressive, and racecraft. Therefore, you began to learn how to deal with that, and also not fold under pressure when you had somebody who was faster than you trying to get around you, and all those kinds of things. So racecraft was a whole nother set of elements that you needed to combat or to overcome as you got into that particular franchise. It was a lot of fun, but the environment is now incredibly dynamic and challenging, and it wasn't just about racing around the track as fast as you can. As usual, I'm drinking coffee here too, so bear with me while I slurp that. Oh, coffee in the morning is great. Alright, so in DCS World, similarly, you're going to need to familiarize yourself with the aircraft. You're going to have to actually learn to fly it. Now, there's the physical element of flying it, just getting it up in the air and learning its handling characteristics, the aircraft's idiosyncrasies, and that's going to change, of course, when it's under different configurations and in different scenarios, weather, lighting, and also the different characteristics of the avionics, the radar, the sensory systems, and all those things are all part of that process. So that's a lot of data that your brain is actually having to process, as well as remembering how to fly the plane. And that's why fighter pilots are some of the top 1 to 2% of people, and pilots in general, are very good at multitasking. Their brains are able to process a lot of information, but fighter pilots particularly, because things are happening very, very fast. And unfortunately, not all of us are capable of doing that. So, remember that, you know, fighter pilots, they don't just start by jumping in the helm of a multi-million-dollar jet and then just figure things out. They've graduated. They've learned to fly an aircraft, for starters, starting out with a pretty basic aircraft, and probably a fixed-wing propeller-driven aircraft, and then they're going to graduate into a jet, which gives a little bit more speed and G-forces, And sometimes even, you could have a multitasking person who actually can't handle the high G physically of flying that aircraft for whatever reason. So, there's things to think about when you delve into this. Now that's the real world, of course. We are not in the real world. We're in a simulation. And, as I slurp my coffee there, and on that basis, I don't care. I'm not a fighter pilot. I'm not a fighter pilot, but I fucking love fighter pilot stuff. This is why I'm in DCS. So I pay. If you've paid money, I'm paying money for this experience. I want to fly my module at my discretion, and you should be able to do that. Nevertheless, even when you have all of that, you have your module. It's going to take some time to learn the things that I talked about, the avionics, the sensory systems, and all the rest of it. And while whizzing around in the game is fun inside the game engine, you quickly limit your experience with the aircraft if you can't navigate, you can't land, or you can't take off, and also use the thing in anger. So those skills take time. So bottom line is, be prepared. Be prepared to learn. And this is why you hear this term called study sims. And this specifically here I'm referencing the full fidelity modules. It's not an arcade game. Certainly you can dumb it down. There is that capacity to use it in kind of a game mode. But most of the modules are accompanied by detailed manuals of up to 500 pages or more, covering the startup, the maneuvering, the piloting of these awesome machines. So be aware of that. So flying it, it's one aspect, but the manual is going to cover the navigation, the instrumentation readings, and there's a great deal of depth in the weapon systems in these aircraft and their safety systems and other considerations that mimic the real thing. So the game engine is very, very sophisticated, and a lot of the real stalwarts of this game and the true geeks, if you like, love this kind of stuff, and they push DCS very hard to make these modules as realistic as possible. And like I said, while it's fun getting up there and just flying it around, you're going to limit your ability to truly enjoy the module if you can't do all those other things. And whizzing around and stuff like that is fun, but then you can't really do all the other things that the aircraft is capable of. Now, flying in itself is just fun, but it's not what this aircraft is just designed to do. So that's time. Lots of time. Secondly, money. Dare I say it, money. Now, like most sims, DCS is also fairly expensive. You can download the game for free, of course. It's a pretty big download, and you can get it up and running pretty quickly here. You'll get a couple of aircraft to try out. I think it's the Su-25T, and I think a variant of the Mustang, the World War II aircraft. But most users are likely going to be eyeing up, with envy for those that already have them, the other more complex full fidelity modules, which, unfortunately, can cost up to about $80 without a discount. Now, in fairness, Eagle Dynamics is pretty good to its community. They offer excellent sales periodically throughout the year. And of course, they also reward purchasing with what they call purchasing miles, which you can earn as you buy. And they can be accumulated to use as discounts towards other modules. So bear that in mind. They are rewarding you with the more you purchase. Now, most people are likely going to pick up what is basically the starter pack, and with this I'm referring to, Flaming Cliffs 3, which gives you the following aircraft and is an excellent place to start. It's sort of a bumper module of bits and pieces of the less full fidelity aircraft, or the non-full fidelity aircraft, which includes the F-15C, the A-10A, the Su-27, the Su-33, the MiG-29A, and the MiG-29S, and the Su-25, which is sort of the dumbed-down version of the Su-25T. Now, these aircraft provide an easy learning curve, and this is a quote from the website, for new players, and focuses on a brand range of aircraft rather than a detailed single aircraft, which I've been talking about. Flaming Cliffs 3 adds a number of new features and improvements to the previous version. For those of you familiar with that Flaming Cliffs 3 thing has been around for a while. It's a module of DCS World, which makes it compatible with all the other DCS World titles like the A-10C, the Black Shark 2, the P-51D, and Combined Arms. So that will set you back at about $50. Like I said, they are not the study sim aircraft as previously mentioned, and for those, as I said, $80, you're going to have to open up your wallet and sink some cash to launch your true sim adventure. But this is a nice place to start, and like I said, it provides you with quite a lot of aircraft to get into the sim and decide whether or not you're going to embark on more purchases from there. Now, in addition to other aircraft, there are other modules to your flying enjoyment. These include things like maps. We have the Persian map, we have the Nevada map, and we also have the World War II Normandy map. There is very soon there's going to be a English Channel map. These are separate purchases. We also have quite a variety of rotary aircraft like the Huey and the KA-50 Black Shark, which I just mentioned, and of course there are other choppers in the game as well. And there's also talk of more coming out shortly with the things like the Hind, and there's another aircraft as well. Off the top of my head, I forgot the name of it, but Polychop is one of the other third-party producers here of rotary aircraft. So let's talk about hardware then. While I hit back my coffee here to keep me going. Hardware. Now, we've talked about time, we've talked about money. This is not a cheap hobby, unfortunately. And if you're going to invest all that time and also spend money on expensive modules, it also begs questions about what I'm going to need to run the game. Can I fly those modules with a mouse and a keyboard? Yeah, in theory you can fly these aircraft with a mouse and a keyboard, but that is for complete noobs. The reality is you're going to need to invest in some good hardware to get the best out of the sim experience, and you're going to need, at minimum, barest minimum, you're going to need some sort of joystick. Once you get hooked on the game and delve into the full fidelity modules, you're likely going to decide that the only way to truly experience a flight model is to splash out on probably a HOTAS system. And a HOTAS system basically means hands-on throttle, hands-on stick. And when I purchased my HOTAS, which is a Thrustmaster Warthog, the difference was night and day. I think I had a pretty decent joystick, but once I got my HOTAS, I mean, just the ability to control the aircraft with the throttle as you're coming into land, particularly, this was very, very pertinent, particularly for aircraft landing on aircraft carriers, where you need to control the throttle to control the glide slope. It just made a world of difference, just having that ability just to bang the throttle up and down if need be, but to also just to control the speed of the aircraft as you're coming into land. Just made so much more sense, and it just was so much more enjoyable. So that's something to think about, that you're going to need it probably at some point to get the best out of the sim, to invest in a HOTAS, and it's not cheap. How much does it cost then? Well, I mean, a HOTAS like the Warthog, Thrustmaster Warthog, is around about $400 and some. You do get two pieces of equipment, of course. You're getting that throttle system, and you're also getting the joystick, and now you've got a plethora of buttons as well that you can program to do a whole lot of different things that you can't do just with the keyboard. Makes things very, very simple. But if you're on a tighter budget, there is good news. You don't have to blow the bank. You can scrounge around online. There's a lot of very similar systems that provide the same experience that are HOTASs that are, within a few $100s, so to speak. But as I said, I mean, I think like any kind of hardware that you purchase, certainly when I found this with the sim racing, the better the equipment that you had, the more enjoyable it is. These things are going to last quite a long time. The Thrustmaster, for example, has got quite a lot of metal in it. It's actually a very heavy piece of equipment. It's very sturdy. So I would recommend, if you can afford it, if you can afford to stretch that budget just a little bit more, you're going to get more enjoyment out of your equipment. It's not going to break down on you. So, and then now, okay, I've got my HOTAS. Do I want a set of rudder pedals as well? Now, some of the jets you can, in theory, get away without having a rudder. It is something that you can compromise a little bit more on, perhaps than the HOTAS, because just being able to control like the speed of the aircraft, like I said, with the throttle in your left hand, it's just awesome. But having, of course, a set of rudder pedals is pretty critical for some of the aircraft, like for example the F-14B, which you need to control your roll rate and stuff with the rudder pedals. You can, like I said, get away with not having them, but at some point you're probably going to think, well, now I've got the HOTAS, I want to get into the rudder thing as well, and now I've got all four limbs are now moving in this environment, and it's just adding just an extra level of immersion there. So again, purchase good stuff if you can, because it's going to save you money in the long run. They don't wear out quite the same. They're not going to break down. I've had my HOTAS now for probably 3 years, and flawless. It's never skipped a beat. It's been great. Okay, so that's the physical hardware that you're plugging into your computer, but what about the hardware for the PC? What are the specs, the minimum specs, or at least the recommended specs for DCS? Most people have well beyond this. Well, what they're recommending is obviously you need Windows 7, 8, or 10. Most people are probably running Windows 10. You need DirectX 11. You need a CPU that's probably a i5, Intel i5, core spec, running at, they say here, 3 gigahertz plus. I don't know what the equivalent would be in the rival, AMD rival. We're talking 16 gigs of RAM. I think most people are probably running easily that and more. I know I am. You need 60 gigs of space on a recommended solid state drive. You need at least a GTX 980 or an ATI R9 Fury. As I said, DirectX 11. It says here you need a joystick, and you also require internet activation as well. So that's, for a lot of people that may be a little bit of a stretch. You may not have all of those things. Now, like hardware for the flight controls, you're going to need, as you can see, a pretty decent system to effectively run DCS. Now, the game is currently undergoing some major graphical updates. They're talking about improvements to the clouds and lighting. So the environment, the map environment is improving. And I mentioned this in a video a couple of weeks ago. And the general consensus on the forums, the general discussions about hardware is always ongoing. And the general feel is that the game software isn't necessarily always taking advantage of the latest hardware. And this is common in most games. The hardware changes, and similar to the NVIDIA ray tracing stuff like that, a lot of the games aren't taking advantage of that hardware architecture. There's sort of a lot of complaints, not so many complaints, but just discussion about the fact that the game probably isn't taking the best advantage of multi-core processors or SLI configured GPUs. So in other words, you can get away with not necessarily having the most fantastic system out there that costs like $3,000. But just be aware, obviously, that the better system that you have, the more enjoyment you're probably going to get. So some of these talking points in terms of the hardware architecture and how it mates up with the software is being resolved. I'm aware that DCS are working on trying to resolve some of these issues, but it hasn't quite come to fruition yet. I notice a degradation when there's a lot of aircraft in the air. The game becomes very choppy, and I'm running a pretty beefy system. I have a 1080 Ti graphics card, for example, 11 gigs of fucking awesomeness, and it's still choppy. Now, I don't know why. I haven't been able to fix that problem. I've tweaked my systems. There's some really good videos out there on YouTube discussing how to get the best optimization, or visual optimization. So look into those too. Do your homework. The good news is that, I'm going to pause for a second here. Excuse me. The good news is that while it's not cheap to build a high-end spec gaming system, like I said, you can spend ridiculous amounts of money on these computers these days. But you can build a pretty decent system, or even a pre-assembled, not pre-purchase, but a pre-assembled system that offers incredible performance. I tried to build my gaming systems with a kind of 3 to 5 year plan, and recognizing that it's probably not going to be optimal beyond 5 years. The hardware starts to wear out, especially if you're gaming a lot, and then it becomes redundant pretty quickly because of the advances in the hardware, advances in software. So it's not a static thing. It's very hard. You're never going to keep up. It's very hard to keep up with the changes in hardware, and things tend to improve within 24 months type thing where major advances are made. So something to bear in mind. That's my philosophy on it. So I'm thinking, okay, over the course of 3 to 5 years, I'm maybe investing somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000, which I think is realistic for a pretty decent gaming system. So next step. If I meet all these requirements and I have the ability to purchase full fidelity module, the next question is, well, which one should I buy? Now, some people have noted on the forums, I've seen people discuss this, like myself, I own several modules, but time means I've probably only spent a little with each, or a lot with one learning it, but I haven't really scratched the page 3 of the manual on some of the others. And so some people have sort of suggested, well, what's the point of purchasing all these modules if you don't have time to play them all or learn them all? Getting back to the original issue that I pointed out was time. And again, it's a tough question to answer because again, personal preference is going to dictate the final trigger pull on the purchase. Which module should I buy over others on that basis? And certainly, I would recommend waiting for a sale if the price point is a deterrent factor. Tactically, if you've got a burning desire to really get into a modular aircraft that you've been fascinated with, you're probably not going to be disappointed. So tactically, you might want to wait for that sale to say, okay, I don't want to spend $80 on a module, but I'm willing to spend, say, $60, or I'm willing to spend $50 and really get into it and enjoy it. Again, the limiting factor of your enjoyment might be investing that time and working out how to get the best out of the aircraft. If I just want to whiz around and fuck around in the environment, I may be wasting money on that basis. So just calculate that. Most of the modules, of course, are extremely well done. But remember that things like the F-16C, that's still a work in progress. That module is not complete yet. It's still ongoing. The F-18 to a slightly lesser degree. A lot of people have made complaints that that module came out and it was incomplete, and players couldn't get the best out of it. And that's a fair criticism, but when you look at the level of detail within those modules, within the F-18C particularly, it's incredibly layered. There's so many weapon systems in there. There's so many things that aircraft can carry. It's an incredibly complex module. So it's easy to be unforgiving when you layer that in. There are a lot of similarities between those two modules too, and one of the things to think about with the F-18 and also say the F-14, you get to land on a carrier and you can also take off obviously from the carrier, and that adds an extra layer of learning to the module, so you're getting a little bit more out of it. Or it's obviously going to be a little bit of frustration too, because landing on a carrier is actually extraordinarily difficult. So again, it's another factor to add in there. And then, of course, if you're buying like the F-18 or even the F-14, for example, well, then you've got an aircraft that does take off from the carrier, or the Harrier as well. Then you may be considering, well, I want to purchase the super carrier module coming out as well to embellish that experience, and that's something else to factor in terms of your purchasing. So again, as you can see, these are not easy. There's no simple, easy answer to all of this, and a lot of it is going to come down to personal preference. Now, in terms of difficulty, in terms of fun, one module that I really, really enjoy is the F-14B Tomcat, and it's obviously developed by Heatblur, who are a third-party developer. This aircraft is just the beans to fly. It's fucking awesome. And unlike the F-16 and also particularly the F-18 anyway, the F-16 is actually not too bad to fly right now because it's it's limited in some of the things that it can do in the game. But the F-14 it's just a hoot because the avionics and the systems within it, they're not too complex. It looks pretty complex when you get in the aircraft. You're kind of looking around and you're thinking, wow, God, there's all these buttons and switches. But once you actually have some practice playing, starting it up and shutting it down and doing stuff with it, you realize it's actually not too complex. And it's a bit of a hoot because it doesn't have an APU. It requires external power and air to get the engines running. And so there's a little bit of a different feel to it. It's a much more organic, if you like, or visceral aircraft compared to the F-18 and certainly the F-16. It's actually not too bad to start up, and I really love it. And it's not long before you can take off and start pissing around with it, and then you get into grips with this machinery that I really, really enjoy. It's a great looking aircraft. Plus, you also get an extra pair of eyes. You have the Rio in the back, who's providing you with, as I said, an extra pair of eyes, and also the electronic weaponry and sensor systems, and that can take some of the tasking off you as well, which the other aircraft don't necessarily have. It's kind of on the individual pilot to gather and process all that data, or at least interpret that data that's being gathered. And that allows you to focus a little bit more on the flying and the shooting in the F-14 that perhaps is not quite so much. You're still processing that data because it just is telling you, hey, there's a contact here, we've got a spike there, we've got mud over here. You still have to interpret that data, but it takes some of the heat off the individual pilot, and you can, as I said, focus on the flying. So that's why I recommend that. As I said, again, it's by Heat Blur. It's a third-party add-on. It's incredibly well done, and it is complete in terms of its readiness in the game compared to the F-16, which I said is still a work in progress. It perhaps is a little bit harder to fly because it's not a fly-by-wire system. It's hydraulic and organic, if you like. I say organic; it's not really an appropriate term, but it's visceral, and its rudder inputs are required, so you will need a rudder pedal set then. But it's fun because of that. It's just a different feel of that particular aircraft. It's one that I really, really enjoy. Plus, it's so iconic. It's in a legendary plane. It's so famous, and it looks cool. It's very fast. It's very, very powerful. But ultimately, like I said, the decision is going to be yours. There are equally interesting aircraft which are also rewarding, and I haven't even touched really the Russian aircraft like the MiG-21 and stuff like that too. So there's lots of different choices to make, and maybe too you want to go to sort of deep Cold War and in between, that 1950s 1960s period of aircraft when we're talking the MiG-19 and the F-86 Sabre. Maybe that's something that you're interested in that doesn't have all those complex systems that the modern jets have, and it is a compromise between the non-full fidelity aircraft and the full fidelity, because while they are full fidelity and they operate very, very nicely, they're not as complex, and that's why I kind of like the F-14 in that sense. So again, lots of information, lots and lots of information to kind of bombard you with. So the last thing here I want to talk about, and I apologize, this video is getting pretty long, but I think it's important to discuss, and that is the VR track IR systems. Now, VR, of course, is uber expensive right now, depending on which thing you purchase. It's still a technology that's relatively new. I don't think it's been fully optimized yet. It's a platform that, I think is going to take over the way in which we interact with a lot of our games, especially for this. It really is made for sims like DCS, and I think it will be a thing that will be a must-have as we go down the road on this. And when you see the value in it and the ability to just look around the cockpit and get that real feel, I can see it being, like I said, the new standard of which gaming, at least aircraft gaming, is going to be the tool in which you interact with the virtual environment. But right now it's a fairly high price point. It's still a technology that's evolving. It's not static at this time, and I feel that based on my initial impressions, while it's excellent, it hasn't been optimized quite yet. One compromise, therefore, would be Track IR, which is a piece of hardware and software that allows your head to be tracked within the game, so you can look around the cockpit. If you move your head in, it will zoom in a little bit towards things that you're trying to click and touch, and it takes some of the buttons that you need to turn the pilot's head around in the cockpit away from that, and you can just use your own head to turn. And that is a really nice compromise. Again, it's not cheap, anywhere between $100 and $150 depending on where you purchase it. But well worth it. Well worth it. It's not as good as the VR. I find that Track IR kind of loses its way a little bit and tends to shift a little bit in the game. So your head's not where it should be exactly, so you have to reset it periodically. This gets a little bit annoying in dogfight situations. Again, something to be aware of. It's great, but it's not perfect. So yeah, those are the things that I think are really, really important to consider when you're getting into this game. And I think it comes down to what I said before at the very beginning. Time and money, unfortunately. Time and money, because this is not a cheap hobby, but it's a fucking awesome one. And it will become a hobby that you will need to really consider how much you want to invest, and just be aware if you're getting into the full fidelity modules, they are study sims, and if you want to get the best out of them, you're probably going to need to spend a little bit of time. And I feel that I'm getting there, but I still need more time to learn and to study and read. All right. Don't take this as a deterrent, please. This is just a heads up before you embark on this adventure. I don't want people to feel betrayed by this hobby because they suddenly realize, well, I purchased this, I downloaded that, and now I need all this other stuff. Well, that's bollocks. No, I mean, yeah, recognize, sure, you are going to need some of this stuff if you really want to get the best out of it, but nobody's hiding that from you, and it is a lot more complex than a first-person shooter. It's as simple as that. And you can spend a lot of time on a first-person shooter. You can waste hours on those games. If that's your bent, sure. If that's the amount of money that you want to spend on a game, then that's reasonable. But just know that when you get into a sim like this, you are going to be investing time and money. All right. I hope that helps. Again, a general overview, a long video today. I apologize for that. Thank you so much, people, for tuning in again. I hope you're doing well. Carry on flying, and don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you around. Thank you.